Howdy, folks. Welcome to JJ's Library and Readings. Glad to have you all back today. Um, got done working out today. Been uploading a couple of videos for the future, so I'm a bit tired, but we're still here making it work. So let's go ahead and read this chapter. So we're back with Between Two Fires, chapter 14 of the Stained Priest and the Widow's Revenge. 2 months before the plague came to St. Martin le Preux, Pierre Mathieu Handicott was in love. His hands shook as he put on his chasuble and prepared the candles with the incense. And when he preached the sermon, his left armpit ran cold with sweat, even though the mornings were still cool that May. It seemed curious to him that only the left armpit was affected. Perhaps, he thought, because the heart was supposed to sit just a little to the left, and his sin, as of this morning, was still only in his heart. The sweat would run from the moment he approached the altar, even with his back turned to his flock. He thought about where the object of his affection would be standing, 3 or 4 rows back, always closest to the aisle, at the level of the stained glass window portraying the brides with their lanterns. He could even distinguish the young man's call from the rest of the congregation. On this particular day, the object was wearing his best gray coat hardy buttoned snugly up his trunk, and Stanley with one leg in the aisle, which all the others looked for rascality, but which was in fact no better display was in fact to better display his bright red stocking, the long well calved leg in it. As Pure Matthew lifted the urchist, he kept his thoughts on the words he was pronouncing, and then he felt the cold sweat running, and knew it was making him stink. The new love sweat hit high in the nose with a sharp note like cheese or salt or metal, or the miscarriage of all three. His inner cassock was so ripe with inflammation that he sweated again when he brought it to the laundress's and blushed when he gathered it back. The boy's father was the village reeve, whose job was to act as liaison between the farmers and their seigneur. As was often the case with reeves, Samuel Herbert was mistrusted by each side. The seigneur believed he let the villagers off too early when they worked his manor farm their customary 2 days per week. This was true. But many of the villagers believed Herbert was too scrupulous in counting and weighing the shares of livestock and harvest they owed to their lord. In fact, this was not true. He often let the best cow stay with the inheritors after a peasant died, and brought a slightly less meaty one up the river as Heorot. Nonetheless, it was Samuel Herbert who took from them, and these proud Norman farmers better perceived lights than kindness, and by peasant standards he was rich. Michael Herbert, his second son, was going to Paris to study law. At 20 he would be a bit older than most of his colleagues, but a tidy bride had been administrated, and a bazaar from the university had met the young man and declared him good enough in Latin that something might be made of him. Soon Pierre Mathieu thought, with great sadness and resignation, those red legs would not be standing in the aisle near the window. He was right, of course, but not because the boy was going to Paris. The great death was coming. It had already begun devouring Avignon, where it was said that the Pope heard audiences between two fires to burn off pestilential air, and nibbling at Paris, where the first affected households were trying to hide their sick so they would not be shunned by their neighbors. The priest knew his congregation was hungry for news about the disease and its progress. He knew they craved some reassurance that St. Martin le Preux would be spared, whether for its holiness or because they had suffered enough under the hand of their greedy seigneur, but because he had not summoned up the words. The truth was that he knew nothing. He did not know how it was spread, what had caused it, where it would go, or what would be done for the ill. What troubled him most was the feeling that God would see into his heart and knew that his love was twisted. God would weigh his most secret thoughts and find them repulsive, and take an even heavier toll on the villains of his flock. He would have thrown himself into the river, but a suicide priest might be worse in the eyes of God than a would-be sodomite. He had never felt so ignorant, useless, or doubtful in his life. His homily addressed the sin of wrath and how much it displeased the world when neighbors bickered over the placement of fences or insults spoken in the alehouse. What do you think will happen in the alehouse? Will you make peace there, or will you quarrel? I tell you, a devil loves no better hiding place than a bowl of beer. He knew as soon as he said the words that he had stepped on a dangerous ground. The whole village knew him for a tibbler. He had more to say about alcohol making people fight, but decided to cut that short and get onto something about angels. People liked angels. But he was too late. He had cleared his throat to buy himself a moment. His most frequently sparing partner took advantage of his slip. If devils hide in beer, is that why you drink so much wine? Said Slovan Berter, the drover. Not everyone laughed, but enough of them so that he forced himself to smile rather than trying to rebuke the popular Berter. A drop of that awful cold sweat ran on his left side. Yes, I know I take more comfort than I should in wine. Even in God's shepherds are not without sin. But which of you has seen it make me quarrelsome? Our drover here often has blacker eyes than his oxen. He glanced at the object who was smiling now, at his skilful repoussé, then cut his eyes quickly away to make it look as though he was surveying all of them. For every time he sneaked a little glance at Michael Herbert, he made himself look 10 more parishioners in the face. The rest of the homily went smoothly, if plainly, into the water clock told him half an hour had gone by and he wrapped things up. When Mass was over, he saw his congregation out. He made sure to turn his right side towards those who came to speak to him, especially Michael. You're a clever man, the younger Herbert said, and looked at Pure Matthew just long enough for him to notice the boy had a sort of black freckle in the hazel of his left eye. There are greater virtues, the priest said, wishing Michael would clasp hands with him before he turned and left. He did not. Rather, he hurried on his pretty red legs to walk beside Merced Arnett, a plump girl whose pretty face, just the color of cream, turned the heads of even those who liked their women lean. He knew from the confessional that Michael had already fornicated with several girls, including his own half sister, and fully expected Melisande to be inventoried soon. He had also lately confessed to having impure thoughts about men. Whatever demon oversaw lust had his hooks deep in Michael Herbert, and used him to ensure others. If there were demons at all, if that boy is Satan's instrument, God, show me sign. Let him look back at me. But he wanted that backward glance so much he couldn't bear to attach wickedness to it, so he confounded himself. Rather, let him look back at me if there are no devils in him. The boy did look back over his shoulder at him, just once and only for an instant, but it was enough. He would always think of it as having started that day. Each night became a battle for Matthew Hannicott. He was in danger of losing his belief, if not his soul. Were there souls at all? Was there really a naked, invisible little version of himself hiding under his skin so valuable to heaven and hell that each would send emissaries to fight for it? He started by telling himself he would not drink more than 1 cup of wine, then 2, and then 3. Lest he should become drunk and give himself up to thinking about those red legs. In the end, his head was reeling, he was spent, dry-mouthed from spitting in his hand, and he lay in shame and guilt until the small hours of the morning. The days were better, even though his parishioners began to ask after his health because he had lost weight and had bags under his eyes. He was far less miserable ministering to them than lying alone with his thoughts. It was better to counsel fat-bearded Samson Bitter to apologize to his wife for menacing her with his bill-hook, and to smell the farts Bitter would gravely fan away from his straw hat. It was better to walk with his box of hollies out to give last rites to Clement Fergie 3 times in 1 week only to have him get well. Even better to be bitten by Figueroa's dog on the last visit and hear the old man laugh from his sick bed. One night near the end of May, he went down to the river and walked along its banks, enjoying the pleasantly cool air and getting lost in the beauty of the sky, where the moon was veiling himself gauzy, fast-moving clouds. She was not full, but she was bright enough to illuminate the river, sending cloud shadows racing over the water and the willows near this part of the bank. It was near one of those willows that a bright swath of moonlight dragged itself over a set of cast-aside clothes. Pierre Mathieu could not resist peeking at the river, where he was sure he would spy a bather. He was not disappointed. In fact, there were two of them, and much closer than the clothes. Seeing him, a girl inexpertly stifled a squeal, then thrashed out of the water, covering her breast, running for her homespun dress. She was plump and pale. God help him. It was Melisande. Melisande. I don't know how you pronounce that name. I'm butchering it. Anyways, he knew who was still in the river. The girl picked up her clothes and ran to where the trees got thicker, and before dressing and loping home, the other made no effort to run. He did not even leave the river. Rather, he just crouched to hide all but his head, and languidly oared the water around him with his arms. He was looking directly at the priest, who stood there for a long moment, torn between turning and walking home and trying to find something to say. Nothing occurred to him. He could not see the freckle in the boy's eye, but he imagined it. He imagined more than that. Cloud shadows moved across the water, now darkening the lad's head, now letting the moon paint it silver. "Come in," the boy said, so quietly that Pierre Mathieu convinced himself he had not heard it. He just opened his mouth and closed it again, like a landed fish trying to breathe. "Come in," the object of his affection said again. "I can't." "Pierre Mathieu can't?" "No." "So shed him with your clothes and put him back on when you leave." "No." "That's the beauty of being nude in a river. You're nobody. You're anybody you want to be. It's just a dream. You use the same words to get that girl in there." The priest opened and closed his mouth. "Come in," the boy said again, and he did. The Great Death got close in June, and the bridge leading to Paris was burned on the seigneur's command. Little groups of armed farmers hid in the woods and frightened off those coming overland from the other side. They soon found that the days off from the farm labor were to their liking. They also found that, with no wives to nag them, they could drink all the beer and cider they cared to. They fashioned masks of river reeds and clay, raven feathers, and the teeth of foxes to make themselves terrifying, and also to remind them not to look anyone in the eyes. It was widely believed that the plague leapt from one man to another by means of deadly beam from the eyes. They called themselves the Brotherhood of St. Martin's Ars. They drank themselves into such a state of deliverance that even groups of strangers who agreed to turn around found themselves cudgeled so that they would remember not to try again. It was not long before they carried their antics back into them with town. Elsie Palanchi, the widow who reigned the alehouse, soon learned to hate the hooting and boast that announced the Brotherhood's return from patrol. Shutting the door was no good. They would keep at her until she opened it, then expect their drinks for free for the solemn work guarding the town from pestilence. Nearly every day they would come over to see the widows' tables, dicing and carousing, with their masks tipped back. Those who watched by day came into the evening, those who watched in the evening came by day. Their farms suffered as their wives and fathers took up the manuring and the weeding and the harrowing. But the men of the Brotherhood had grown so fond of their newfound status as militiamen that there was no reasoning with them. The reeve could not make them work, the priest could not turn them away from their folly. Their number did shrink as some men, like Samson Berter, found their better natures and dropped out, but it grew again as bullies saw a way out of work. When one of them stole wood from the widow's house, saying his duties left him no time for chopping, she tried to block his way out, but found herself pushed down on her backside. She complained to the herald. The herald promised to take the matter before their lord, but nothing was done. The seigneur, terrified of plague, had suspended court sessions and shut himself away with his retinue. Only the herald was seen, arching his painted eyebrows and reading unenforced proclamations from the back of the palfrey. Men at arms could be seen walking into the parapet of the keep, their armor winking in the early summer light, but they never came down any more. The Brotherhood of St. Martin's Ass was all the justice there was in St. Martin le Preux. One night, when there was enough moon, several of the day watch went drunkenly into the river to gather reeds for new members to make masks with. Steering for a growth of reeds near the charred and collapsed timber of the bridge, one of them noticed a pair of red stockings balled up on the shore. Other clothes were concealed nearby. "Look here, boys," he whispered. "We've got some June frolics in the river. "Ho!" one of them cried, slapping the water with his staff. "Come out, little fishies. One of you can show us her gills." They gawked at that and began whistling, but no head broke the water. "Under there," one said, pointing at where the western ruin of the bridge still stood. They waded in the mud and looked underneath. There, hiding in the pilings, shivered a very pale and naked priest holding the hands of the reef's son, who was also in the state of Adam. Both of them were slicked with mud halfway up to their shins. "I don't believe my whoring eyes," one man said. Now the boy panicked and sloshed out towards the other side of the bridge. Running when he got to the bank, Pierre Matthew nearly followed him, but then lost all hope. He turned his back to the men, held his face in his hands, and cried. He was sure they would kill him. None of them moved for a long moment, then one of them spat on him, then the other, then all of them had done so. They turned, laughed, and walked back up the river into town to spread the news. So was that when the plague came. Only a dozen souls were coming to Mass. Pierre Matthew's assistant and bell ringer, a stocky, busy, black-haired child everyone called Burden, performed his duties without his former energy. Hardly any received the priest when he came to anoint their loved ones in death. Only a handful sought confession. Soon the reef's son died, and the reef and nearly the whole village. Heartbroken yet afraid for his life, the priest stopped going to church at all, shutting himself up in his house with his wine. It was not until the monster moved into the river that the villagers sought their shepherd out and shamed him into helping them. There was no one else they could go to, so he tried. He went house to house seeking men who could use a weapon. Then he saw how strong the thing was and knew he did not have enough healthy men to fight it. He took back up the place where the Brotherhood used to wait and sat with his lantern, praying for soldiers to come down the road. As it turned out, one did. As far for the Brotherhood of St. Martin's Ass, they were already gone. They were, in fact, among the first victims. The widow fell ill, having caught it from the farmer's child who helped her clean up, and the surgeon had refused to see her. Trying to do for herself what she believed she would have done for her, she bled herself into a wooden bowl, though this only made her weaker. The lump in her groin was so painful that it was all that she could do to drag herself down the stairs into the alehouse door when, after one of her bleedings, the Brotherhood pounded at it. They wore their masks, they stank of drink, and were demanding more. She told them to go away because she was tired. They insisted. She told them to go away for the love of God. They said they had none, so she served them. If they tasted the blood mixed into the beer, they never said a word about it. So I damned half my village. My weakness made them hate me, so they stayed away from the Mass. They were cut off from the sacraments. Thomas furrowed his brow at the priest. But it doesn't make sense. As you said yourself, most priests don't have a mistress. Why would they hate you so for daying with the girl? The priest shook his head and looked at the sky. Why would the boy run off and leave the girl in the river with you? And why would she want a knobby old priest twice her age when she could have a handsome lad who was going to be a lawyer? The mysteries of the heart are unknowable. And the way you described his legs, it was the boy, wasn't it? You kept saying the object of my affection because you plumbed the boy. No, the priest lied. What good is confession if you lied? Everyone lies at a confession, around the edges at least. A man who fornicates with his brother's wife will say it was a whore. A woman will say she was glad in her heart that her blind and deaf baby died, when what she meant is that she drowned it. But I wasn't lying, because a man of war like you cannot travel with a known sodomite. You're goddamn right, Thomas said. You need the object of my affection to have been the girl. Yes, so it was the girl. Good, I hope you fucked her right in half. The priest smiled sadly and kept looking at the sky, though the moon was gone again. Covered over the cloud, Thomas drank another swig of rainwater and went inside, mildly fuming. I wouldn't leave you, a small voice said. The priest looked down and saw that Delphine had come from the barn. If it was the boy, she continued, I wouldn't leave. He smiled at her and wiped at his eye with the back of his hand. Then the rain came, and they all tried to sleep. That was a very good chapter. I was not expecting the priest to be gay, and I guess if I thought he was, then I thought Thomas would understand or at least not care, but I don't know. These characters are interesting and very complex, but I think that's a really good thing about this book. Either way, I hope you all really enjoyed the book. Or the book. I mean, yes, the book, but the chapter. And like always, good morning, good evening, good night. I'll see y'all tomorrow.